everyone is in their own shell. If you understand what it means, right? So if you're an electrical engineer, you will not move anyway from that electrical engineering discipline. The computer science will get stuck to the computer science and so on and so forth. And this is a problem not just in academic institutions. It's the same problem in industry to all the areas. So that's why interdisciplinary research always have faced a lot of challenges. Now the way to get around that is first thing is to break those barriers. How do you break that barriers is by looking at problem. Uh, why are you doing this? That question needs to come in at the very first. So we had over the years developed many different solutions. Most of them are interdisciplinary, and often the challenge has been how do you find the right kind of people for getting that done? Because you may have an expertise in an area, but not the right mindset for bringing it together. So if I want to build a particular product, often an experience of a material science person would be required. If you're building an electrode, for example, and then at the same time you would need an experience of a software guy and um, electronics hardware guy, everyone to actually discuss things together in a way to solve a problem. And that belief is the driving factor. And if you look at the total numbers, they are quite large, right? The problems, most of the problems that we are looking at, 7 billion people that you're trying to address. And how many of those are really getting addressed? Probably 5% or less. So more than 90-95% of those population gets unaddressed yet. I mean, there is the solution doesn't reach there. And that is another area that requires a lot of work. It's not going to happen in one day. It takes years of effort to reach there. One time I had this experience while and I asked him, what are you actually doing? And he took me to his house, and he had around 27 cars. Okay. So different models from showing then I asked him what is your job? What are you doing? Then he told me that I'm making simple cutting surgical instruments. Right? Okay, all you're doing is making this one surgical instrument, and you're making so much money. Why? Because, and then I realized that what he was up to. They need to find the right alloys, the right kind of combination of materials. The tool itself needs to have a lot of accuracy, precision to many things. And he had a group of 20-30 PhDs trying to figure that out. And the depth in which that was going in was a completely new kind of insight. Because I thought as an electronics engineer, my worldview at that time was building 2 nanometer chip was the thing, designing. That was the complexity. But then on the other hand, you could also see that this is also kind of very complex process that goes in, and where science just gets translated to something very much. And he took me to his lab, and what they were doing, they had clean rooms. They had all sort of experiments being done, trying out many different. Although they were having only one product coming out, there were probably 50-30 innovations that were actually happening at the same time. And that's a kind of thing that is needed if you want to have companies that could survive for long. And these guys are supplying everywhere around the world, and in India also we buy their things, and so on and so forth. And they have plans. He was saying places which you never hear about, in some places in Africa, some places in all sort of places. And then they're looking at where the material availability was easiest, cheaper, They get the people that are trained and get this thing going. So this is a space that has got a lot of opportunities, and irrespective of which field you come from, there are like ways in which that innovations can happen. My takeaway with that all of those things was that most of those innovations actually fail. A lot of them fail, and that is given. That is something that you have to take it to, take it with you. That out of maybe 10 or 20 things that you attempt, maybe one or two will be really taking off. And that requires a lot of effort in terms of time, thinking, and so on and so forth. And for a startup, this may be a very hard thing to do. And this is where it makes a lot of sense to collaborate between the startups, between like the universities, between the research labs, and so on and so forth. Because one way to drive the innovation is through a lot of collaborations. And one way to also check whether those innovations will succeed, right? Fail early. Principles in practice, saying is one thing, but practicing it's a very difficult thing. You try, you put like 6 months of effort and it fails, it's a very hard thing to handle. You will not let it go. As an innovator, it's very, very hard to let it go, that something fails. So, but then if you work on 5 things at a time, maybe one failure is still okay. Because you can have like, out of 5, like one will be still okay, which you can do that. So some level of strategic thinking would need to go into that rather than focusing on like, one thing and that alone. You need to see the different dimensions of the innovation and different dimensions of how do you take it to the market. Then this thing opens up. Like, you will also get like a lot of help from the people around when you actually place those things in that context, getting in expertise and things like this. And in all of this, what drives a lot is also some level of trust. So again, one example I can say is like, I discussed one of my innovations just about like finishing PhD. There was one of the famous like professors in the field listened to the idea and said like, dismissed that completely. And 3 months later, the guy publishes that. And I was so pissed off, right? Spend like so much effort, energy, and things like this. My view is that innovation simply needs to be open. That I'm not these days like worried about discussing ideas with anyone. After all those experiences, like okay, if you want to do something with this idea, go ahead, do it. I don't have any issue with it. Now, thing is like taking that idea to actually making it useful. That's a different story. Because the path that you can take an idea and get it commercialized, get to make it useful for one population is very different to another population, and there is a lot of innovations required, re-engineering required. So that itself is like a path on its own, and that's where like every startup can again like come in, and these discussions can quite help. Like if you go to many of the labs around, just take your ideas, just ask this opinion, like what do you think about this? Right? I'm not sure how many startups actually do that, right? Because most of the startups are very worried about IP. When you share this idea, whether it will be taken by 10 people or 20 people. See, it takes effort to take it to the next level, Maybe when you go to identify the right kind of people who you can trust, build a trust, talk to them, and you will see that the whole thing accelerates. The idea itself may find a lot of new shape and form, which you could then take it further. And this is how a lot of interdisciplinary startups in Europe, in US, and many other places work. And that is something that is lacking in an Indian ecosystem. there is a failure, there's a fear, and all those things. You shouldn't. You just simply need to identify the right kind of set of at least 5 to 10 people who you can actually talk to on a regular basis, test the ideas out, and and if you are afraid, like you see, like you would see many a times, like a PhD student or a postdoc is very afraid to share their paper. It's a very common thing because they find like it's not published, like should I share it or not? See, these days, like you submit a paper to a journal, what is the guarantee that it is only seen by those people? The reviewers would have, like shared it to 10 people. You never know, and this has happened. So that's why this archival system came into picture, where before you submit a paper, you put in archive for everyone to read. So the same thing, what is stopping innovation for driving it? There are many programs which do that. Open innovation is something like encouraged to drive the innovations faster going to the market. That's just a thought from my side. We have an ecosystem that is getting built. So you can see, like we have a 2D material like center coming up, where we are looking at various graphene related things, like clean room getting built. There is a various kind of sensing related, like there is a center coming up. The focus of those places have been like also to have an R&D support, not just limit to the idea that like you have an idea and you just try to take that idea to re-engineer and engineer, but also have a support for R&D. So that's the idea of those centers. And we also are having some of the other things, like we are having a program for commercialization support. So where there is a business development activities happening along with the R&D and those things. So there are some of these things coming up, probably something that you can explore. There's some funding available in that as well, which you can apply and get the assistance and help to take it to the next level. Thank you.